Hello everyone, welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. Tonight we are back with our world building project, Sunderhearth. This is a fantasy world that we have been building one episode at a time, once per month. We bring on a new guest and they help us live improvise without preparation, without notes, without preconceived notions. We come into these sessions and we build a world together. So it's been a lot of fun so far. This is the 9th episode, which is going to be history in the macro sense, so kind of large scale, far away view. And yeah, I'm really excited to bring on our guest this evening as part of KielCon 2020, the inaugural run of Kiel's celebration. I'm hoping annual. And yeah, it's been fun to kind of see all the little things that Kiel managed that you put together for this celebration. But before we let you do your introduction and all of that, I'm going to pass it over to my partner in crime, Steve, so that he can throw anything else out at you that he wants. So, Steve.
I don't have anything else to throw out, like legitimately. Yeah, I mean, that's Sunderhearth in a nutshell, right? Episode 9 is kind of crazy because it's been almost a year now, so that's nuts. Other than that, just looking forward to it, and we'll get in and talk about the history of magic. I'm sure. So what'll happen.
Little did we know that constructing an artificial world was going to cause ours to just start falling to pieces. It just so happens.
Hey, whoa! We are not taking responsibility for that. Has nothing to do with it.
TM,
None.
Not us.
But if you do donate, we'll fix it.
What's this wheat stuff? So yeah, I'm excited. This is a really cool topic that I have not given much thought to at all yet for Sunderhearth. And Kiel, I'm happy to have you on board, sir. So why don't you plug whatever you'd like to plug, talk to the people, say hello.
Thank you. Hey, I'm so stoked to be here. I've been following this series and just been loving. I've not been able to catch any of the live streams, so I'm stoked to be able to do so for the first time by being in one. Hell yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Jeremy and Steve. I'm really looking forward to diving into this today and seeing what what we can uncover as world building archaeologists that we are. I'm Kiel Adam. For those who don't know me, I run, write, and play role-playing games and a bunch of other stuff. Got a YouTube channel linked below, which is all very new. And I've just launched a Patreon as well, which is part of KielCon 2020. It's celebrating my birthday and the launch of my endeavors, my creative endeavors there. So, and absolutely, this is the inaugural one. I'm well and truly planning to have a KielCon every year, and they're just going to get bigger and better every time. So, yeah, stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. You and I have kind of run the same circles a lot, and I think we've played in 2 games together. That sounds about right, I think. Yeah, both of which were amazing. So it's always good to get to chat with you and hang out with you and stuff. And I know that you really enjoy world building. It's something I discovered about you fairly recently. You put out a lot of world building stuff, both on your channel, which for those of you who are interested, please do go check him out. You should be able to find the link to his channel in the description of this video down below. But yeah, man. So I'm really excited to kind of pick your brain on this, especially since you've been following along. So I'm ready to get started if you guys are. Yeah. Okay, Kiel.
Let's do it.
So go, man. No, I'm just kidding.
Let's open those history books. All right. Here's what I've pre-prepared. No.
Postcards.
Unfurl the scroll. Yeah. The tomes of time.
Long ago.
Did either of you guys have a starting point that you mentioned just before? The history of magic. Is that a good place to start, or?
Well, that was largely sarcasm, because
you always go into magic.
Because everything. I mean, so it's a fun thing about a fantasy world, right? It's gonna have a lot of magic. I don't really have a good starting point. Like, I mean, all right. I guess here's a question: when we talk about the macro history, are we talking about the history of? I assume we're talking about the history of the world as a whole and how it informs Sunderhearth versus the history of Sunderhearth necessarily. But it could be the history of Sunderhearth, because at this point, originally we were talking like, oh, it's been a couple of generations, and it seems that we've pushed that a little bit in some of the other sessions, and it feels like we're sitting at maybe closer to 100, 120 years since it happened. Like, we're, some elves and dwarves remember it, but most humans are dead. So however you guys want to handle that, whether we want to, maybe touch on the outside world and kind of how it informs Sunderhearth, and then look at some of the bigger pictures inside of Sunderhearth. Don't know.
Well, I mean, one of the things is, like, obviously we can't get too involved here, because the history of a place, even as, quote unquote young, if it's in the medieval ages or whatever, as Sunderhearth, that's a lot of history to try to peg. So I think keeping it to a small, finite number of really important events that helped shape what Sunderhearth is at the time that we consider people to be playing, I think that's probably going to be a lot better.
And we can consider the events surrounding them, and we can also, something that I think of with history is, especially in fictional worlds, is the ages, right? Or like periods of history. So, and generally it's like one cataclysmic or one very significant event that is the turning point from one age to the next. So maybe that's what we can spitball a little bit. So obviously the most recent huge one is the Sundering itself in modern history, like 100, 120 years ago. So we've got current era, which is after that, I guess. And then do we want to delve in before that and divvy that up a little bit? Or
I guess in a macro sense, that'd be a good way to start. Is if we take the world and say, what are the eras of the world, right? So we know we have the Sundering, right? Like that's a obvious point, and we can look at what's ahead of it and what's behind it. Um,
Well,
and
in Dice Ogre brought up a really good point in the chat about, is it
oh yeah, chat.
pre-sundering and post-sundering? So like they literally reset the year count. Like year 0 is when the sundering happened, and now we're in, Anno Domingo, Domino.
Anno Domini?
Yeah, maybe that's it. AD, whatever.
Anno Domingo, the year of Monday.
Domingo. Whatever.
Garfield would hate that. A year of Mondays.
That's what 2020 is. The year of
yeah,
Mondays.
exactly.
Yeah. No joke.
We need some lasagna to get through that.
So, Kiel had said, the modern era or the current era being post Sundering, but I think some of the stuff we've talked about is that the world drastically changed once the Council of Martyrs and some of the more political entities started forcing the relaxation of travel between Sunderhearth and the outside world. And that would really become when the age of adventuring inside of Sunderhearth would kind of start, at least as far as external individuals, right? It's the discovery of the new continent type of deal. There's always been people there, and you can tell those stories if you want. But you're going to have quite a few characters that are made from the outside world because the player wants to have the experience of experiencing this for the first time. So I think maybe you have the Sundering, you have, just post Sundering, and then you would have like because it's not quite opening, but the relaxation, like however you would term that, when political entities outside, like merchants and influential politicians, actually started sending people into Sunderhearth because mana kernels had made their way out. So they knew that those things existed. They realized that magic items could be brought out of Sunderhearth. So now there was a market and economy for those items to come out. So that would, to me, be another sort of redefining moment. So I think you have a period of time between the actual Sundering, the wall goes down, and society becomes what it is inside of Sunderhearth. And then you have the current one, which is that sort of relaxation where adventuring is a bit more commonplace.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if we're talking like a year or like 100 or 120 years, then that seems to kind of be a sweet spot for a cultural shift, like a marketable cultural shift in, like you said, for people to only remember what happened before through word of mouth, through what they've like been told, most of the people at least. So I think if we're going to focus on specific like defining features that separate ages or eras, I think we're probably going to have to focus more on the beginning, like before the Sundering, because there would certainly be more history on that side.
Yeah. And there's those eras don't exist in a vacuum, right? There are all the little things that make up those eras. They're like the prominent figures at the time, the heroes and the villains of that time, the zeitgeist, right? Like the feeling of the times from that era. So that kind of stuff will be interesting to explore. And then, because we kind of have pieces from the present and from the past, that from the world you've built so far. And so we can kind of pull threads from both directions to sort of extrapolate and whatever the reverse of that is, intrapolate forwards and backwards. Like, here's where we ended up for this particular detail. What makes sense that came from, and then vice versa as well. Yeah.
Real quick though, Carol in the chat had asked if someone could explain what the Sundering was. Hey, Jeremy, you want to give her a rundown what Sundering is?
Sure. So effectively, a group of cultists, high-powered priests during a war, sacrificed the god of magic, and it basically fractured him into physiological and metaphysical pieces. Like his psyche actually splintered and shattered, and now magic is wonky and broken and chaotic. And it all started at an epicenter, like a ground zero, and then out around there has been a magical barrier that has been built to contain the magical fallout, essentially. The Sundry.
Yeah. Sacrifice gone wrong. All right, so taking Kiel's idea and working backwards, we know that the sacrifice, the assassination of the god of magic, happened as sort of a nuclear option, right? It was trying to sort of turn the tides of a battle or end it once and for all. So we know the battle existed. Maybe a good thing to know would be how did we get to the battle, and maybe who was involved, because we've actually never covered that.
Perfect. Yeah. And I mean, that's like in terms of grounding and a real world like point of reference, 100 years ago was World War One for us, you know? So that's just for me to try and get my bearings in terms of the scale, you know, like a few generations ago. And so imagine if, you know, World War One went nuclear towards the end of it, right? And how different the world would be for us now. So, and, you know, so some of the things that makes me think of are like people having ancestors who fought there, obviously. And I think that kind of thing's been discussed in terms of the ones who were closer to the epicenter. They became, you know, vessels for these mana kernels, basically. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of the ones at the center are exactly that. They're left over either like the contingent that armies would bring with them, right? The cooks and stuff that would go with them, and not just the fighters themselves that would be out there on the battlefield. And that's kind of what's left over, plus a small population that would have lived at this city that was renowned for negotiation. That's why there was supposed to be this I don't know, maybe it's like an affront to politics, right? You have a site that is well known for being one for agreements and concords and such like, and instead it is now the site of a brutal sacrifice in an attempt to essentially detonate a bomb, right? So it's almost a terrorist attack. And in fact, that would be very interesting to think about, is maybe there really was supposed to be some sort of peace accord that was kind of being thought about, right? These two massive armies meet on a battlefield outside of this city that's supposed to be all about treaties. And instead of ever getting a chance to actually talk it out, this god is summoned and detonated in their midst, so that the cult of the god is the ones responsible for it, but they weren't necessarily politically aligned to either side. They were just trying to stop the fighting. Because we never even really discussed that, is exactly why killing a god became an option.
I think that's something to explore. I think, yeah, focusing on this war, and the battle and the event of this assassination that followed, I think spending a good amount of time on that is probably worthwhile, because in terms of taking it to a playable setting, that's going to be like the most recent big thing. Like that is the most recent event in modern history, right? And that's and so from that as well, like to me, that makes me think of like the two opposing factions. Do both of them still exist on today in one form or another? How were they changed by what happened, and who is the loyalists to, one side or the other? I feel like maybe those factions and like ideologies maybe. So exploring who was fighting and why, I think, is maybe just taking a step back and taking stock of that is a good way to approach that, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, if we look at what we know, like what we've already established as a part of this thing, is a god was summoned and sacrificed by a collection of like high-ranking priests, essentially. Okay, and we know that there is a ton of these arcane kernels here close to where this happened. So it had to be in the middle of a populated place. So we know it was either inside of a city or just outside of the city's walls, something like that, a very large grouping of people. And if it was two armies that were having an issue with one another, then that could also be in the middle of a battlefield, even. So maybe there was a long-standing war that was going on, and this was, an ultimate showdown. This was the big battle that all the armies showed up to, and as such, one of the sides brought out their big guns, this super dark secret that their priests had, and pulled the trigger on
it. I think we had talked about in episode 6 or 7, one of the two, that the magic that was used to sacrifice this god was supposed to sort of turn the tide, but they weren't given the full ritual, right? Someone set them up for failure, like, because this type of magic had been done previously. I think we'd even talked about it maybe being, one of the more ancient races, elves or whatever. And it wasn't, executed appropriately, which is what causes it to go south. I really like the idea that you brought up, Jeremy, that there has to be that city like very nearby. And I kind of like, that sort of image of Helm's Deep, right? Or even Minas Tirith. Like, you have this large city that is perhaps a bit more of the, like, someone mentioned in the comments, like Switzerland, right? They're uninvolved. And so you have these sides, and I think you're right. I think at this point it's an ongoing war, a long-term war that has gained more and more factions to each side. So it's not just the North versus the South, right? It's become more of a world war, and but in order to try and abate it, because there was the fear of magic escalating too much, that war was escalating too much, that too many people were going to die. So there was the idea that maybe we can talk it out, or maybe there was going to be some sort of ritual duel or whatever. Like, something was going to settle this once and for all. And I think that one of the sub-factions in one of the two sides are the ones who pulled out the dirty bomb. And with every, all good, was it the road to hell is paved with good intentions? Like, they meant to do good, but yeah, unfortunately it went horribly wrong.
Yeah, well, the good they were trying to do, like, at the most obvious level, was finally end this seemingly endless war, I suppose. And someone said in the chat, suggested that one of the involved parties was benefiting from that war, right? And they were wanting to prolong it. And they probably successfully had been prolonging it for far too long in many people's minds, right?
Okay, so, and this is probably just the fault of how much, like, Greek media that I'm trying to consume at the moment, but what if there was another god, a rival god to the god of magic, who is the one who fed them this information, who set this up, and they, god or goddess, benefited from this war continuing?
Someone did suggest in the chat God of War, And I'm imagining that maybe they were, influencing people.
Yeah.
They weren't necessarily brought here and on this plane doing so, like the god of magic was summoned here and sacrificed, but from their godly realm, that's you can't beat that for why is war being perpetuated, because war gives this god of war power and more strength. And
and maybe the god of war dislikes how much magic was taking place in this war, and that people weren't relying enough on sword play and
Right. It lowered the
cavalry.
brutality of it.
Right. Yeah. So
I mean, you don't have to fight over food if you have one person in a village that can cast Goodberry. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, very much so.
The more sources for conflict, magic was tending to maybe alleviate, making life a bit better and more comfortable and things like that.
You're muted, Steve.
No, I'm just
stammering.
I was trying to think. I'm not good at it. So we know that it is actual priests of the god of magic who botch this sacrifice. So if we run that backwards, why would you as a priest be willing to sacrifice your own god? Well, if it's been done in the past, that there comes a point where these gods and sort of their ebb and flow of power do this grandiose thing for their people. They sacrifice themselves. A new era, like ancient era, is ushered in. It changes the world. It changes the people. But that God always comes back. So there's no harm in this, because legend, myth says that this is a cycle of the gods. All they're doing is participating in the cycle now. But the god of war has used his agents to slip bad information to these priests. So he intentionally, and we had talked about this before, was attempting to murder the god of magic, not necessarily knowing that the outcome would be this huge thing where magic is now leached into the world, and much to his chagrin. But it did get a lot more brutal. And he's not the only god to benefit from it. And in fact, that answers our question that we had in episode 5. We had talked about some of the gods had come to the material plane to sort of take a look around. Well, it makes sense for him to, right? He's got to see what's happened. He's the one who's taking a little less hands-off approach, and is probably bending the ear of the Sundered King on the outside, who's getting ready to go to war with the Dwarven nation, right? Because if magic is contained in there, then the war out here has to be brutal. There's no magic for it. It's going to be cannons and swords and none of this fireball and healing. So he's going to get his out there.
And I think especially something like firearms being developed, gunpowder, becoming a thing, the god of war would certainly sit up and pay attention to something like that. Like, that's a game changer. It literally changed the face of our entire world in real life. And it changed the way everybody fought. And so I think the god of war would definitely be taking an interest in extensively testing these, seeing them in action, seeing them in wide use. So I think he would certainly encourage the war that's kind of brewing on the outside of Sunderhearth.
Dice Ogre says in the chat something that I was thinking of as well. Maybe there's a third god, god of secrets. I was thinking like god of trickery or cunning or shadows or something, but I like god of secrets, and maybe they were the one working with the god of war, or manipulating even the god of war, or maybe orchestrated this whole thing. Yeah, I do like that idea. I don't know how much we want to flesh that out here, how much it might add, but I think it's good fodder for a particular faction who were, the worshippers of the god of secrets, like who are like this underground network. Like their priests are not out in the open. They are just as every bit as powerful as the high priests of the god of war and the god of magic, but they're way more covert.
So the
Kind of like that
interesting
idea.
thing that comes out of that is even divine magic doesn't work outside Sunderhearth, right? Because God stepped back. Partially because so the gut reaction is a god dies and every other god goes, you know what? I'm not so keen on these people anymore because they kill us. And so they step back. But if there is influence, not magical, but guiling influence from the god of war, the god of secrets, and they're manipulating things on the outside to sort of turn the world without magic into what they want. And maybe the world of Sunderhearth is a bit Faerunish in that gods used to be hyper involved. Maybe they did actually, I had just said that, there was a cycle of them ushering in new eras by sacrificing themselves or committing some other grandiose act. If previous, the god of war would come down and side with his people during a battle, but because he enjoys war so much, he's playing both sides of it. Gods can do that. Then when all of this went to shit, the gods lost a lot too, right? Because they can't be as directly influential as they have been in the past. And I think that creates, like what Kiel was talking about, I think that creates an opportunity for this god of secrets and maybe even lies to start whispering into appropriate ears, right? So the god of secrets becomes the agent of the god of war. Because the guy who's used to kicking in doors and bashing in heads isn't going to go whisper to someone a broken formula for a magical sacrifice. He's going to get his buddy, who's really good at getting people drunk, to go give them the wrong recipe. And so that sort of sets a deific faction that we haven't talked about before.
Yeah, and Cole Sparks mentioned in the chat, War God gave them the right ritual, but the God of Secrets was kind of responsible for it being the wrong one.
That's funny. That's funny. So the God of Secrets is playing both sides of it.
Sure.
Right? Like, Kiel said maybe say God of Secrets, God of Trickery. So if you take secrets, trickery, and lies, that seems a pretty good portfolio for one deity. And so there's just an inability to tell the truth, right? So he has to have that last laugh. It's the Joker as a god.
Yeah, it's their nature. Like they are an embodiment of manipulating. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right.
low-key.
But even so, you have this sort of chaotic, lies, trickery, secrets, and even that god's not willing to go to Sunderhearth like proper anymore because it's too chaotic for him or her.
I was going to say, that they would probably revel in the fact that it's as unbridled as it is, but it is still dangerous,
right.
It's been proven that the knowledge to sacrifice a god is now out there, somewhere. Whether it's the right way or not, I don't imagine a god would be keen to stick around.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Nice. So, going back to history, what is it that led to this culmination, to this betrayal of the gods that acted out on the mortal stage? What kind of brought things, at least in the mortal realm, what brought about that moment, that conflict?
That's a good question. What do you got, Kiel?
Yeah, I've got an idea. I like to think that just as in truth, the conductor of this horrible cosmic orchestra is the god of trickery. What was it? Secrets, trickery, and lies. The agents and the followers and the priests of this god were the ones, orchestrating it on the mortal scale. And so I think their big driving thing was I love that cycle of the gods that was spoken about, where new ages, historically, before there were any mortals, this is the cycle of the gods. They come, they sacrifice themselves to, do a bit of a reset and an upgrade or a change in the metaphysical world itself, and then as mortals started existing, then it affected them as well. So, but it's a cycle that came before them. And so the followers of this god, their mantra, their whole indoctrination is the breaking of the wheel. And so that was what they were driving for.
Okay. So we have this really interesting idea that you keep bringing up about cycles. So what if the three factions involved with this event, again, kind of going back to ancient Greece, they all followed one of these gods? So the entire army of the god of magic, the entire army of the god of war, the entire army of the god of secrets show up once a year to this event, and their god is brought forth. They are sacrificed. That civilization's era falls back. They're not the prominent world dominant leader anymore. The others have a chance to rise, and then the cycle repeats itself. Their god comes and sacrifices themselves, and by that time, the god that had done the sacrifice initially has built back up followers. They've, the civilization has brought them back essentially through worship or whatever, and they keep going through this cycle every time. And this time, the followers of the god of lies decides, no, we're not going to keep doing this anymore. We're gonna try something different. And this is what happened.
So, all right, I love that idea. I'm going to curve it. There's 4 factions: God of War, God of Magic, and pick something else. We'll have to figure out what it is. And so there's supposed to be a 4-way cycle: A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Well, Secrets, because he's not the brash, strong, he doesn't ever really get a full cycle, never really gets to shine, and finally had enough of it. So he's the one that's been orchestrating, where she has been the one that's orchestrating all of this from behind, continuing this war, trying to weaken the other 3 sides. God of War is loving it. God of Magic finally sees it and goes, whoa, let's give the people more magic so that they can heal better, so that they can not hurt each other as brutally. Like they'll get these big weapons and they'll scare themselves, and it'll be much calmer. Other faction, whatever god it is, agrees to it, but you have the god of secrets out there manipulating all of this. Goes to the god of war and goes, maybe it should be your turn next and not the god of magic's. Maybe you should have 2 cycles in a row so that we can end this war once and for all. Of course, he's going to love that. And so he sets him up to murder the god of magic, creating a vacuum for the god of lies to step into. God of lies knows it's going to take out a lot of people with it, thus weakening the followers of the other factions, and is supposed to step into this vacuum, not realizing quite how broken it's going to end up. But I think maybe that's why we might find out that the God of Lies spends a lot of his time or her time in Sunderhearth walking around, because without a whole bunch of followers of their own, they're feeding off the chaos of Sunderhearth as much as they would normally their own followers, which is driving them even more crazy. And that sort of fits in, the God of Lies and Trickery may actually know where all the parts of the God of Magic are, but he likes them broken. He likes them crazy. He likes being able to whisper into the mind of this broken god he's never been able to do before, and turn the god's id versus his ego against itself, so it doesn't naturally want to coalesce, and that's why it's being forcefully having to be put together by mortals.
Hell yeah, dude.
I love that. Love all of that. And I love the idea that the god of lies is a she, is this mastermind goddess.
Yeah, because a lot of the goddesses, of fate, destiny, things of that nature are
Mm.
all weaver types, and they all use a lot of loom imagery and things like that, and it's very much, at least in medieval connotations, that was almost always a woman, and the weaver, the mother, and I think especially whenever you start getting into like Loth and things like that. There's a lot of imagery of webs being spun and threads everywhere that connect things. So I definitely like the idea of it being kind of a spinstress kind of person.
So Carol had mentioned in chat maybe using the god or goddess of life. And I like that. So you have war, magic, secrets, and life. Normally you would think death would be in there, but I think death is that removed god. It's the much more natural god, right? Like he's not the god of murder or anything like that. He's just the passing of time. And so he, is much more akin to like the observer that we talked about on the mountain. So I think in doing this disruption, Secrets was hoping to slide into that slot, right? So because you think about the four seasons, war might be summer, life might be spring, magic might be fall, and death would normally be winter. Well, sliding into that last slot, Secrets has opened up, and I don't think death is confrontational enough to risk, or maybe even in a point where he can't risk it. She can't risk it, because if the god of death were to die, what does that do to everything, right? Like that might actually unravel things more than the goddess of life dying or god of life dying. So maybe
Love
he
that.
was the
Yeah,
one that
that
spoke the wisdom of, hey, let's step back.
mm.
And
Yeah, I love the idea that death is not part of this cycle. Death is a constant, because that's just
right,
that makes so much sense. Yeah, yeah.
right, and that fits really well with what we talked about in Sunderhearth with people not transitioning right to the afterlife as well, because not death is never an agent of his own. It's always other things. And with there not being active war involved in there and magic not working right, and secrets being a little too crazy to handle stuff, there's no agents of the cause of death, right? So it's really just people dying of old age and bad adventuring. And because the magic is broken, you know maybe even death is waning a little bit, right? Because he's not getting all the souls that he's used to or she's used to. And that might, in the like mythic cycle of the world, that might be the ending point where the rebirth of the world happens, right? When something goes so screwy in the cycle that death stops getting as many people, life takes over again, repopulates, we get war, we get magic, and that brings us back to the cycle of death. And if you look at an eternity of that, well, Secrets got really bored, because
Yeah, exactly.
when is it Secret's birthday?
I love the terminology that someone put up in the chat, that these are like seasons. So maybe that's even in, like you were talking about it, a yearly cycle. So maybe, I don't know if there are, maybe this is instead of seasons as we know them, it's not necessarily based as we know it on the rotation of the earth and the position around the sun. It's these longer cycles, which are whichever god, whichever season it is, whichever god is having its time or goddess is having their time at the moment, like that. Like in the real world, winter, everything's a certain way, everything's cold. There's snow in certain places of the world. In spring, that's when new life is coming up. So the landscape of the world and the feeling of the world, and including the flora and fauna, reflects like which god or goddess is in charge at the time, or
Right.
has the influence at the time.
I think trying to have that much deific influence inside of a year would be bonkers for trying to run an extended campaign. But the idea that
That's fair.
the idea that each season is influenced by that god. So during summer, tempers tend to run higher. Makes sense, right? In spring, all the new babies and animals are being born. Okay, well, that goes with life. That makes sense.
That's cool. And so then so you still have the 4 seasons there, and one of each of the gods is attributed to one of those seasons.
Right.
But also, so the summer during when the god of whatever it would be, or say spring during when the god of life, during the year that is the god of life's reign, is like super spring. You know what I mean? Like, and likewise with summer when the god of war, maybe it is in there. And so there's this real like roller coaster of, it makes me think of the, I think it's the Chinese calendar where there's like all those animals. There's like year of the rat, year of the dog, but there's also month and day of the rat and dog. So you have this 3-point combination. For us, it's just 2 points maybe. Or maybe there is a week which has a 4-day week or something as well. And so that's probably getting a bit too far into it. But
no, I think that's great. The idea that you would like, if the god of war is in charge of an era, that summer would be intensive, right? There would be more wars, more insert here. And if the goddess or god of life is in charge for an era, then during that was the huge spring, and there it may even like mythologically be like, oh, that's when the dragonborn showed up, was this one random spring and during the era of the god of life, and it gave rise to this new creation type of whatever, however the mythology itself plays out.
Yeah, I really like the idea. I think it was Dice Ogre who said it as seasons. I really like the idea of even calling them seasons. So like the season of Aries or whatever we end up calling the deity of war, and that can refer to, like you said, it could refer to an entire year or possibly even longer. What is it? Westeros. Their seasons last like decades.
Right.
So
does that make the current season the season of secrets, which works so well with the average population not knowing that the queen is the fire elemental, that the king is sundered, and that there's two versions of him, that there's a secret war going on, that we have the imposter inside the Council of Martyrs, that there's a war, like there's so much that is so secret. And I think Carol hits it on the nose there. If each season runs roughly 100 years on average, then it makes sense that we're kind of hitting the heyday of secrets, right? Like he set this off, she set this off, the bomb goes off, it destroys the world. We're waning out of the season of war. And now we're sitting in that season of secrets.
Which was meant to be the season of magic, right?
Which was meant to be the season of magic.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And magic
That's
showed
cool.
up.
How cool is this for a...
Thinking, hey...
So I was just going to say...
I'm just going to accept the crown now, big ceremony, big normal to do, whatever. Yes, wonderful, great.
Oh.
And Shank...
Oh, that's the
Julius
answer.
Caesar.
That's the answer right there. Why were all these armies there? Well, it's the passing of the torch. The god of war is literally supposed to show up and talk to the god of magic and go, hey,
it's the coronation.
Tag out. It's your season, bro. So wars aren't going to stop. They're just not going to be as intense, right? Births aren't going to stop. They're just not going to be as intense. But magic is about to hit its heyday. Now, maybe Secrets goes to the war and goes, hey, bro, you want another cycle? You want another season? Some back-to-back war? I got you.
Yep.
And he's like, hey, I remember some time ago, there was this god of whatever that we sacrificed to do this. Give me that information and I'll pass it on to the peeps. You get to go round 2. War's like, me bully, sound good. Goes and does that. And the Secrets is like, nah, dog. That's not how it's going to work at all.
That's great. So war, or Ares, we'll use the placeholder name. Ares was coming to this like, okay, cool. I'm not going to be sacrificed. Everyone thinks I'm going to get sacrificed, but that's not what's going to happen. it's just going to be a different kind of ceremony. I'll just get to keep the torch. I'll stand up there with the torch and then walk away with the torch. And magic has shown up, as they do every century. Like, okay, cool. I'm going to receive this torch. and magic is like, okay, cool. War is about, Ares is about to get sacrificed so that I can, absorb the torch, or however that actually looks. And then as the ritual starts, they, what is that? Should we figure out, even just high level, like what that looked like? Like, did magic get like bound in some way, and then that, because if that happened, like, it wouldn't have been quick, you know what I mean? It would have been this thing where at some point during this ritual, even if it was relatively short, the followers of the god of magic would have kicked off, right? Like, all right, all these armies are lined up there. This would have just been, let's clash.
I mean, think of the scene as like almost like a sea of humanity, right? Because it's not just these major gods who are going to be there. Other gods have shown up for this too. They witnessed the murder of a god firsthand, and that's why they all go, nah, we're out. So I think that idea of the torch is very beautiful, right? So like, War shows up and he's got this like gleaming battle axe, and the followers of the god of magic go up and take it, and it turns into a scroll, and they bring it down, and normally they would present it to their god, and that would be the passing of the torch. And instead,
So Dice Ogre has another idea, and I think it's brilliant. So I'm going to throw it in here before we get too far down the torch thing. His suggestion was the crown was actually a trap, and it is what sundered the magic god's brain.
So I'm all for it, because I was going to say that when they handed him the scroll, it exploded, and that's what did it. So same idea, right? So they take the crown off of the god of war.
Ugh.
It's transferred from the god of war's high priest to the high priest of the god of magic. God of magic kneels down to receive the crown, places it on, and you just see it start constricting, and these like vines and stuff biting into his head. And then there is a moment of oh shitness that happens across the crowd. Some of the gods blink out, taking some of their followers with them. Some of them just run. Others sit there and witness everything exploding, and they become mana kernels, because that sucks. Now, the followers of the god of magic knew that. So we had talked about the followers of god of magic knowing that they were sacrificing their own god, but now it sounds like they don't.
And I don't know if that's even necessary. I'm trying to think back through kind of what we've already kind of decided.
I don't think it is, because
I don't think it plays any different.
If the high priest puts it on his head and witnesses these things digging into his god's head, and then the head literally being ripped apart, he and his followers still feel responsible for what happened, and thus
they were not devout enough. Like, they failed their god. Yeah, like they were impious, or how have we forsaken you? Like, there would be this insane, well, I mean, they didn't survive, right? But there would be this insane guilt for those few seconds.
Yeah, this is really cool. I like this.
So a big question in my mind right a second is, and maybe it doesn't matter, but I'd love to know the answer anyway. How does the god of secrets manipulate this crown to cause it to go crazy? I'm thinking somewhere previously in cosmology and mythology, there was a need to kill a god. Maybe it was, the god of murder or something, and the other gods got together and said, hey, this is deific magic. This is how we erase a god from existence, and we'll just divvy out his portfolio to other people because this guy's bad for business, or however it works out. But how does the god of lies manipulate the crown in order to cause this?
So I have two suggestions.
Okay.
A is the god of lies did it beforehand. That was easy enough. They were already talking with the god of war, And they could have, as part of the, okay, yep, hey, you want another season? Give me that crown real quick. Let me let me fix that up for you. And that's when they do it. And or B, the high priest of the god of magic, who received the crown from the priest of war and placed it upon the head of the god of magic, that magic priest was a betrayer.
So we're gonna have to keep referring to Dice Ogre here because I think he hit on something beautiful again.
Mm-hmm.
The god of afterlife is usually dead in most mythologies. So the only god that's been killed historically is the god of death. He had to be able to assume that to be the god of death. It's why he's not super active.
Hades.
He's dead in order to rule. So that magic
That's
that it took
awesome.
to move him to that side of creation is what got put into this crown.
So I had an idea where through, like, the god is sacrificed. Ares is been killed. Is how the cycle normally works. They sacrifice themselves. Someone else achieves the mantle, receives the mantle. That god is reborn, almost like the Dalai Lama. They're reborn in a different body, and they're not a god yet. This coronation ceremony is about them receiving their godhood. It's literally a mortal who has risen up through the reclaiming of this civilization. When the civilization of magic reaches its pinnacle, their most prominent, their best, their brightest, becomes the god of magic at this coronation. The next incarnation of this god of magic. And so the person who showed up to be crowned the god of magic was not actually a god yet. But when this crown was placed on his head, he still received his divinity, but in that instant his psyche was completely fractured, and he exploded with all of this magic chaos.
So the only thing that creates is this weirdness where that means that until he's crowned, there is no technical god of magic because they're still dead from the last cycle. So how is magic working? Because we've established that the god of magic has to be around for magic to work.
They are, and it's just that they have a worldly host, one of the most pious priests or something like that.
Yeah,
but,
I worry at that point that we go so Forgotten Realms that the gods are constantly walking around, and like having them there occasionally is cool, but like the whole Mystra and Kalimdor and Cyric thing being humans that then just become gods because but I love the idea that it's a high priest that is being promoted or deified. But what if that is what if that is part of the cycle, right? So that the most prominent warrior has to sacrifice himself for the god of magic to come into full, or god of war to come into the full bloom. And then at the end of that cycle, the god of war sacrifices himself or steps down, relinquishing that power. It's transferred to this crown. He's still the god of war. He's just not in his full glory. And you take that crown over. Normally you would place it on the head of this priest or mage, and he would go through a transformation where he's ascended, like that energy is absorbed up to the god of magic, and the god of magic would then now be in his season. But instead of being absorbed, it shattered, right? So that connection is in that moment. That connection truly is deity to mortal world through a conduit of that crown. And when this guy is ripped apart while that divine connection happens, is how we end up with the god being broken. Not just the person who was hosting that connection, but the entire
being, or the entire god themselves. I love that. I love the that really makes sense. That fits so well that there's like this whole because it's killing a god. It's not easy to kill a god, right? And I love the fact that it's not just knowing exactly which ritual to perform, which words to speak or which way to mess with the crown. It's also like this tiny window at that one point of conduit. I love that. That works so well.
Right. It's the only time, air quotes, the only time that the god's able to be killed is during that transference of power, because he's not fully human and not fully divine at that moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is interesting, because that means that when they did the magic to kill the god of death, that means that he was not fully divine or whatever at the moment, but that'd be the only way they could kill him, right? So that means that there's a human death equivalent out there who is probably the world's oldest lich at this point, but is just mythological. Like, doesn't, it's so far removed. Sure, if you want your adventure to go that way, you can, but religion, the dogma of the god of death and the mythology says that there is someone who sits in the world undying, because that's how they maintain that, right? Because the god of death never cycles. So that means his human connection, his world connection, can't die either.
Yeah, his avatar.
Yeah.
It's like a one-way stream rather than two-way with the other more active gods. Like death, like you said, is like on the other side of something, and they can receive stuff from the material world, but they can't put stuff back into it.
Yeah.
They can't. Yeah.
Whereas like the avatar, the human, the mortal link for the god of death could just be some old woman walking around in a village who bakes bread and reads books, and you would never know, except for the fact that she's always been here and no one can ever remember her not being here, and she's always been 600 years old. All right, so during that transference of power, the god of secrets has rigged the transference, the crown, to go kablooey rather than allowing the transference, hoping to take out the god of magic so that he could then have his season rather than the god of magic having his, right?
Yeah, the way that I was kind of seeing is almost like you said, this conduit that's opened between divine and mortal, and basically they just fractured that conduit in the middle, and all of the god's divine power literally came out at once. Instead of it, making this transfer, it literally just shattered everywhere. Uh-oh.
No, I just had this image of the actual person literally exploding and the viscera hitting everybody who's standing close. Meanwhile, a split second later, the god detonates above. And
well, I think in that moment, they're one and the same.
Just.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about like whenever you follow the kernel kind of to the arcane kernels to its center, there's this literal like a starburst, at this epicenter of this material, where everything's just kind of fused together in these webbed fractures.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so the big war that was going on, what's the impetus for it? We don't need a whole lot of detail, but we know the impetus for it is a cycle, and the god of war was just in his heyday, and so there was going to be war. But if you were to ask the average person historically, what was the impetus for the war? What were they fighting over?
It's a good question. I mean, there's certainly religion and ideology is a very strong thing in this world. If each god, the followers of each god, so basically the members of each church, or however you might want to look at it like that, are very devout.
I mean, I think Cole's got the point. There wasn't even a war at that point, right? Like, this was the end of the season, and so everyone got together for the coronation. So there's been wars. Throw in whatever wars you want in the history, because they're kind of meh. Because from that point forward, history gets changed dramatically. And so they're all there for the coronation, and it just.
I think it's really interesting too, because whenever I was initially picturing this cluster, whatever this epicenter kind of was, I was picturing these arcane kernels. So it's almost like a blue kind of shimmering ice type material in my mind since the beginning. So seeing all of these warriors in mid combat, that's kind of what I was seeing in my mind. These little frozen, basically, immortal statues of these people fighting. But I really, really like the idea that it's people that were in revelry, people that were celebrating, gathered there with their entire families. And it changes the way that this whole place looks in my mind, and I like it. It's
Yeah, because we had talked about like the city that adjoins it. It sits on the plateau where the Watcher is now, having people who were turned dark king kernels also. Yeah, because those were the people who couldn't get out to see it firsthand, right? Because the city still has to function, government still has to function, and so these are the people who get left behind, but they're still close enough to be caught, in it. So it's almost like a New Year's countdown, right? Like they're in there going 5, 4. They got their wine glasses up inside these buildings all over town. Like mothers are holding their babies up out towards the plateau so that they can witness this, and then just.
Oh, so epic, so horrible, and amazing at the same time.
And
yes, that's the word.
So then the question becomes, well, why do some of the cult or the followers of the god of magic, because they become the cult of the Shattered One, how do they survive? Well, in that moment of deity to mortal connection, he realized what was going on, and he could protect some of the people closest to him, and those would be his followers that were placing the crown on his head. And so when everything else gets nuked around them, a core group of them, those high priests, the ones responsible for this, the ones who apparently just muffed it up, are saved by their god in a last-ditch effort. Yeah, that's a lot of weight to carry, and enough to break your brain and make you go, okay, well, I guess we need to put our god back together because we screwed up royally. Yes, babies covered in god goo.
Yes.
.com actually.
Oh, God.
Don't Google that.
Don't try it. So,
God,
I think that's I just love the way that's shaped up. So now, shall we, knowing that that sort of all that meat that we've added to the bone there for that event, the sundering, or the breaking of the wheel, for those loyal to the God of Secrets, like now sort of looking forward into what we've already got established in the setting beyond that chronologically, and sort of seeing maybe some things will jump out as a tie-in, or like extra connections now, or.
So I think it fits beautifully into, was it Dice Ogre that talked about maybe the calendar reset during the Sundering and went to year 0? Someone mentioned it.
I think
well,
so.
It makes sense, right? Because now the DFX seasons aren't happening. Like
right.
No one's sure whose season it's supposed to be, so the calendar has to restart. And
no one's sure whose season it's supposed to be. That is a very God of Secrets seasonal thing to be occurring, right? I love it.
Absolutely.
And I think, the guy Secrets is playing it coy, because why wouldn't why wouldn't they? So they're not sending their followers out to announce, oh, hey, it's the God of Secrets time, right? They're just reveling in what they've done. And so if it's been 120 years since, or 115 years since it went boom, that means we're already slightly over what a normal season would be. So he did it, right? They did
GMs, right? It's like
yeah,
the God of
Secrets did it perfectly.
Yeah, exactly.
He's the first god got us to get back-to-back seasons.
Yeah, like the buzz around the world is like at the point, that this setting chronologically, the setting when you sort of actually, package it and release it as a playable setting, that's the ripe stuff that's happening right now. It's like is there going to be a change of seasons at all? Like some people are preparing as if there's going to be, because that's what's always happened as far as they're aware. Yeah.
And it's nice too, because you still have these people that are going through the motions, hoping that there's going to be a new coronation, a passing of this crown, but their god stopped talking to them. So
and next in line is meant to be the god of life, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's the regrowth cycle. Like, bring it on.
And everyone's excited, but nobody knows if it's actually going to happen or not.
And after the massive loss of life out on that battlefield, and the city nearby, and because right afterwards we had talked previously that the god of one of the other races had come in and died, and it wiped out that race entirely. I don't remember what we said it was, but we had chatted about it. So anyway, you have this massive loss of life twice, and everyone's going, okay, so that we're about to hit the season of life. And every time that happens, we have 100 years of lots of births, better crops, this sort of rebirth, but it's already 15 years late. Like, where, when, how? And so these people are really desperate for the gods to come back, which gives that fake church on the outside even more power, because remember, they're the only ones in the world saying that they can talk to a deity. And so now people are flocking to that, because maybe this made up god is the one who's going to be the next in the cycle, and that's how the world gets restarted. Because
near the beginning, you brought up the fact that after the 100-year point, recently people have started coming back through the barriers. So maybe at that 20-year mark, that's whenever they kind of opened the border. Like, the people on the outside are trying to get people inside so that they can have this coronation, so that they can bring back the god. That's what they're telling everybody, at least. And people are like, okay, yes, we're ready for this to be over with, so let's make some amendments here and let people start coming through, because we need to get people to this coronation.
Right. Plus, like, we should have been going into the age of magic, or the season of magic, and we didn't, because that god was killed. Magic goes batshit on the inside. They block it off. But it's been 100 years, guys. We're no longer in the throes of the season of magic, so it'll be better. We don't have to worry about it. It's okay for you to go in there and start exploring now. And, of course, bringing us all these delicious, juicy things. But don't worry, it's nowhere near as dangerous as it was 100 years ago. Man,
this is
good PR company.
Parallel
yeah, I love it.
This is scary.
Yeah. All right, so we got that part. We know that the next big event is when the council on the outside, Council of Martyrs, and then the people on the inside, the Hearth Wardens, finally agree to start allowing transport through. I was thinking maybe that's only been a few years, like 5 or so ish years, that people have really gotten more access into Sunderhearth. But we could also say it's just now. Like, this is the moment that really it starts happening.
That's what I was just saying. Is maybe it was it's been 100 years since the Hundering, or since the Hundering. Cute, Jeremy. Thanks, brain. Since the Sundering, and now, fuck you. It's been 15, 20 years.
It's been 100 years since the Hundering.
You see what I work with? You see what I have to do?
I'm sorry. I'll see myself out.
Turn off Steve's camera. No. So no, seriously. So maybe that was when they started lessening the restrictions on who could come and go.
Right. So some of the small things have already happened. The moat got built, and that's sort of like the test run. for the Council of Martyrs. Like, hey, nothing really came out and ate us, so okay. Do you think that our Cardinal Richelieu, our bad guy in the Martyr Council, is actually just a fervent follower of the God of secrets and lies,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's why they are
Yeah.
doing what they're doing?
I like that a lot.
That's cool. Love it.
Because if this chaos that is inside of Sunderhearth can flow out to the rest of the world, that keeps things imbalanced, which means that nothing can ever mount against the goddess of secrets. It means it's eternally their season.
Sweet. That's a pretty bow. I like that.
I love it. Which the followers of the God of Secrets are like, that's their mantra, right? Like, the wheel is broken. Like, this is now our time forever.
Right. I also like the idea that there's going to be a lot of people who think that perhaps this new church on the outside is just a manifestation of these followers of the God of Secrets, and it's not. It's just a bunch of BS from a really smooth talking individual who's gotten a hold of a few magic items from Sunderhearth and therefore can do, some magic enough to con the average person. I hope I don't offend anybody in chat, or actually, no, I hope I offend you if this is the case. It's kind of like Scientology, right? It's all hidden behind a gold piece level. You can buy your way into that religion. Okay.
Smashing through those paywalls.
That's right.
Arch dragon or whatever wizard.
It's just different DLC for real life.
You've unlocked an achievement. Yeah, I love that.
Cole says in the chat that GMs now have a motivation for all of their bad guys, like a go-to motivation. They're a follower of the God of Secrets. Exactly. And then GM to GM, it's like, how deep does that go? What plots are they weaving? Like, that's just really good fuel for the fire.
So Cole asks, is the God of Secrets wandering somewhere? Are there random miracles every once in a while? Inside of Sunderhearth, there definitely are random miracles every once in a while. There are still times where, as you're writing your story as the GM, the gods are tipping their toes into the water and stepping into Sunderhearth and saying, okay, is it time for us to come back? And because of that, unexplained miracles without casting happen inside of Sunderhearth. Miracles, as we would call them, happen in there all the time because there are crazy ass people who will tap the chaos of magic and just do things. Outside of Sunderhearth, I don't know, gentlemen. What do you think? Have any of the gods bothered to actually step foot or step presence back outside there? I don't even know if even the goddess of secrets would do that, because it would possibly be revealing too much and would thwart the entire effort, right? The absence of the gods on the outside is what's allowing the God of Secrets to do what they're doing. So I don't know that there's
exactly. Yeah.
I think the only miracles that happen on the outside is when someone gets a hold of a wand of cure wounds and is healing people with that, or a cleric or a wizard who's been charged by being inside of Sunderhearth and steps out with their scaly arms and cat-like eyes and goes, "Don't worry, I'll heal you." No, you won't. No, you won't, monster
Don't
person.
touch me, bro.
Right. That was contagious. Magic is contagious, actually.
Well, yeah.
Maybe minor deities. Yeah, maybe that's. I mean, I guess that would be up to you when you're running it. Is do some of the minor deities, are they starting to slip back out? Especially because we had the changing, right, where people woke up a different race all of a sudden because of the chaos of what happened. So maybe Gribble Snot, the minor deity of the goblins, is doing some stuff out there because it doesn't matter to him as much to uphold this, but he's not, but that's up to you. Minor guys seeking to be promoted to the wheel, sure. I mean, if that's their aspirations.
Yeah,
Hey,
I think
look, we
it's
did it.
probably
We managed to talk about religion and not magic.
I think I think too that leaving it as a typically, no, the gods don't make themselves known. But if you want to have that in your game, then yes, it would just be really unusual. But that, I mean, if you're going to insert that into a campaign or a one shot or whatever, then it should be.
Yeah,
Make it something
and I
really
think
unusual and special.
the window into that you can define in the product that you make from this is like, now that it's 15 years or so past when the next coronation would have been, some of these minor gods are like, all right, this ain't right. It should have changed by now. I should have gone down for the coronation. And yeah, so I don't know. And they're going down and doing and maybe investigating, or like, all right, if this isn't going to change, I'm going to go see what I need to do to maintain my portfolio, you know, down there in some kind of way. So I think there's that aspect, but I think they would be rare, or again, that's a sliding scale that the GM can pick. And I think the God of Secrets is, as well as this is what they've worked towards, like for probably before mortals existed, right? Like this is currently the payoff period for what they've been working towards. So they are not only playing all the mortals in this way, but the other gods as well, especially the minor gods. They're like, you know, recruiting more or less, or, you know, like they're spinning their side of things, and just sowing chaos. You know, there was someone in the chat put before, and it's not something we've really gone into too much, but it would absolutely be like the, why did this happen? Why did the God of Magic die? And obviously God of Secrets is well prepared for that, and is, you know, throwing smoke screens and getting people to point fingers at each other, and just like the God of War got power and just feeds on, or whatever, like warfare and blood and all that kind of stuff. God of Secrets feeds on uncertainty and chaos and that kind of thing. So that is what they're well and truly sowing in the world and in the realm of the gods.
I think the goddess of secrets becomes this PR person, and when the god of magic dies, like they show up and go, "See, I told all you other gods you could never trust these people. Look what they did. Y'all should really step back and think about this for your own safety. Meanwhile, I'll keep doing what I'm doing, but y'all should definitely step back." I love the idea that some of these minor gods are going, "Hey, isn't it about time that the goddess of life checked in?"
So that position hasn't been filled yet.
Right. So, I mean, I know I'm the god of potatoes, but I'm thinking potatoes grow, and that's kind of like life. Also, Cole, it is your responsibility to write the adventure where some followers of the goblin god Gobblesnot decide to head into Sunderhearth so that they can raise their deity to the point of taking a position in the cycle. Go ahead and get on that. It's your homework. Okay, so wow, macro history becomes religion.
Theology.
Yeah.
So, I think, truth be told, a lot of the history before the Sundering, or the Hundring, depending on who you ask, could
get out, Dice Ogre.
Could have kind of been. We did kind of establish that it was this rotating cycle, seasons of these gods. You know, so I imagine, obviously, there would be large historical events that were peppered through those different cycles, through those different seasons. But I think we established enough about, like, having those rotations that led to, you know, the pinnacle event, you know, the Sundering. And I think that's, honestly, for me at least, that's enough of a framework to kind of establish as this is what happened before, and now going forward, here's, you know, the things that you need to know that lead us up to, you know, 120 years later or whatever.
Right. I mean, some of the other things, if you're looking at writing this as an actual product and you want to put some fluff into it about, the Iron Fortress of the Dwarves being founded during one of the seasons of war, cool, right? It just becomes all fluff, because most of the material that you would normally find, like say Forgotten Realms again, for example, where they tell you what happened every 3 years on that timeline, doesn't matter, right? Because it's a cyclical deal until, as Kiel has called it, that wheel gets broken.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's the bold strokes that you'll paint for the GMs and the readers of this this setting guide, and you can even have some suggestions there, like you said, for the finer details, and like you can kind of say, here's some options, pick what you want, because I know, and you've talked to quite a bit in some of the other streams, you're really keen on leaving certain things up to the GM, and some of them you leave completely open. Some you can, here's a sliding scale, or here's like a roll table for what it is the truth in your world. You can take a page out of Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin, and the way they do that with some, here's some options, and your version of Sunderhearth, so to speak, for certain details. But all this other stuff is true about the world. It's just your version of it, for what you want to do for your campaign and your group and your story. So if you want
the big hard date to remember is that Sunderhearth, as we know it, is founded in the year 0, because that's when the scale resets and it starts counting, and you're picking up somewhere in the 10 to 15-ish and go.
Well, I mean, this is going quite a bit off the rails, but I'll say it because it's a different idea from what I've seen in any setting guide. You could have that as the timeline, and it goes up to, here's some of the bold strokes that led up to year 0, and here's like a blank, or like fill some blanks here in your version of the timeline between year 0 and now. You know what I mean? And they can put in their own events. Here we go. This is history now. This is
right.
Make your own modern history version of Sunderhearth, for the GM. So
I mean, that works out really beautifully, because one of the things that I find, like, I have a hard time playing with a DM running Forgotten Realms, because I know it so well that if they're like, oh, it's the year this, then as the player, I already know the history, right? Which does make some of the role play easier. But also, if you just say, hey, year 0, Sunderhearth explodes, and that's kind of where the history of this starts, and somewhere in the first 2 to 3 years is when we start, seeing the wardens branching off into the Dowsers, and really that became a big thing about 5-ish years ago. And you're leaving a lot of your timeline in terms of ish, right? Because if you're an average person inside of Sunderhearth, you're more worried about the fact that your corn can eat you than you are what year the Dowsers really popped up, right? You're going to go,
Sam,
it was a
couple
bite
out of me.
Right. You're going to go, man, it was a couple of years ago. And that works out really well, because then the players aren't so hard pressed to have to learn all these facts about a world to be able to exist in it. Like, because that hurts sometimes in your role play, right? When you come up to a situation where the character should know a fact, they should know who the president was or the king was, right? They should, but you don't as a player, and so you kind of stutter across that. Well, if it's amorphous and fill in the blank, and you kind of take that page out of is it Burning Wheel that does that, where when you're making the characters, you're actually also making the history of the world that they are involved with. Because like if you roll I think it is, if you roll a soldier, you're actually going to help fill out what war you were a soldier in, rather than just taking like the soldier background in D&D. Because then you go, okay, what was I a soldier in? Like, what is it? Here, you're going to be able to fill out that in the same way, right? So if your characters are starting, 25 years old, okay, all you have to do is in your background, that session 0 with the GM is say, hey, these are the things that they did during that time, and they go, cool, that fits into this like this, and you just move forward, right? Because Jeremy's Sunderhearth will be different than Kiel's, will be different than mine. This is just a rather than a full-blown setting guide, this is a springboard for your adventures in the chaos that is a broken world. And moving forward, like we're not role-playing history, we're role-playing the future of Sunderhearth. And that's going to change every time someone picks up dice.
Exactly. And I love that that example that you gave. I've not played Burning Wheel. I'm only peripherally familiar with it. There's a lot that I love about the bits that I know of that system, but I didn't know about that. And the turn of phrase that comes to mind for that is world building through character. And I love that, where it's like, because that's the way I love to look at things, and I tend to approach things is like, what's relevant to the story? What's relevant to what's going on? Like, we haven't gone into events that happened during, 4 seasons ago for the God of War, because it doesn't matter to the world and what's going on, and it's not going to matter to the story. Like, you've got that bold stroke that you can sort of riff on and reference something. If it's like, a great grandparent fought in this particular war or whatever, you've got that to riff from, but that's not relevant. And taking that approach of the lens is the main characters in this story, which is the PCs, like if one of them has the soldier background, let's figure out which war they fought in, and generally that's especially in the groups and campaigns that I tend to play in, that's how we tend to do it, just organically, but having a little bit of a structure and guidance on how to approach that, or even just some specific prompts. Like, if you are a soldier, work with your GM to, figure out which war it was, and, but really tying it down to the human, or, human, whether you're a human in race or not, the human aspect of it, and the personal character aspect, as in character in a story, because that's what really grounds it and makes it so much more rich. So.
And we have an episode coming up that is the micro history, right? Where we're going to be able to focus down a little bit on what really we don't need to worry about the micro history of the last 10,000 years, just the micro history of the last 15 years. And really, it's just going to be hitting those highlights and kind of looking at how they have kind of less the history lesson and more how they've informed where the players start, right? So you don't need a degree in history. It just will give you more flavor for what the political climate, the adventuring climate, the religious climate is like. I'm sure it'll birth out some more, notable NPCs and things like that as well. But it's interesting because a lot of settings, they hit you with so much history that you're trying to figure out how to make that history relevant to the story you're telling now. And so you end up with the acts of the characters being viewed through the lens of history. Whereas in this case, you're going to look at what comes out of it through the lens of the characters, like Kiel was saying. Like, it becomes much more about them and less about the world.
Well, and also, like, when you hyper define something like history, it makes it very, very hard to insert something of your own design that you can then use as a building block. You feel boxed in to find something that's already existed in the canon in order to use that first. But I think the genius of using something like just a framework is, it's like an armature for a sculpture. You've given literally just something to start with, and the person coming along to tell this story, the people coming along to tell this story, they're going to add their own clay and decide what it looks like as a finished product. But having that framework there to base a beginning off of, at least, is always good, because it gives your imagination something to begin with, something to start with. You can already start to see the shape that something can be.
Exactly. I love that analogy with the armature for sculpture. It's like, here's the rough shape. Now give it some finer edges, and give it your version of the shape that it's going to be. Like, the three of us could sit in a room with the same, with our own version of identical armatures for that's meant to be like a duck or something like that. We'll come out with 3 very different ducks, but they're all ducks. You know what I mean? Like, it's all Sunderhearth. It's all just our version of it. Yeah. And yeah, I'm seriously, I'm so excited to. I know it's still a ways off to finish this series and then put together whatever you're going to put together. And I'd be stoked to be involved in the actual putting together of that if you're looking for people. But yeah, I'm stoked to use that as well. Like, because that then in itself has this collaborative world building aspect of, session 0, and it's sort of tied to character creation. You've got year 0 and year 101 through 115 that are kind of bookended, and then you can slot in that 100-year gap for stuff that's relevant to your characters themselves and their parents and their mentors, or you can sort of plot out their life path and sort of see where things went, as much or as little as you want, as suits your group. And some groups might even have one player who goes right into that and with the GM, and then the others don't need to so much to enjoy it. But yeah, I really like that approach. I've not seen anything like that before, I don't think. So that's a really cool thing.
And I think for those people who really like sort of defining moments in their world history, to have some examples of events that might have happened in your 15 years of Sunderhearth or the 15 years just prior to, so on and so forth. Maybe an example is the cult of the Shattered God managed to collect a few pieces of the id, and so that has started this transition, and this happened some odd years ago, and so you're basically creating historical events that become adventure hooks rather than dates you have to remember. Like they only really become relevant to the story, like if they're relevant to the story. Think about take Jurassic Park, for example, one of my favorite movies of all time. Does anyone care what's going on in Canada, sorry, Karen, during Jurassic Park? No, you don't. It's not relevant to the story, right? There's definitely history going on, but it's not relevant to the story. So we don't need Alan Grant to understand what was going on. It's irrelevant. But if you find out that the guy who developed Engine, the bad guy company from it, was doing something in Canada about cloning dinosaurs and turning them into human hybrids, which was almost a plot for Jurassic Park 3. Yeah, I'm not lying. I'm sorry, 4.
Really? Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. So then it becomes relevant, right? So if the characters in their background say, hey, this happened to my character, then now it's relevant. And you sort of craft those moments around their backgrounds because they're the heroes of your story.
It's similar to whenever you're playing like an open RPG video game, and you go up and you accept a quest line. Now all of a sudden, the information that is pertinent to that quest matters. It may not have before. You may not have had any clue that this cult existed or that this mountain was called this specific thing, but now you do. And it's the same kind of thing whenever you're developing these ideas for what happened in that latter part of the history, right up to your campaign. When one of your players says, and I fought in a war because I took the soldier background. Okay, well now you need a war. So go to the list if we're going to have that kind of a thing and roll randomly or choose one or, whatever, come up with a war. So that way you shape the timeline of your history through things that are relevant to your players, your characters.
So one of the things that I think almost every guest has mentioned at one point, and Jeremy has mentioned a lot, is broad strokes, right? Like we're painting an outline and letting you, it's paint by number, but you guys get to pick your colors and fill them in. We're just making sure that when you paint all the twos, it's all blue so that you don't have a polka dot hippo. My analogies are so good tonight. They're not.
That's going to be the name of my first character in Sunderhearth, Polka Dot Hippo, the paladin of.
That's right.
Could use that as my first campaign, but I guess not. No.
But if part of what Sunderhearth does by painting these broad strokes and saying, here's the highlights, you guys play what's important, then having a section in the book that we can talk about working with the character so that when they say, hey, my character was involved in a war, well, now that GM and that character, that player sit down, they map it out so that it becomes personal and relevant to the player and the character. and personal and relevant to the GM's world. And so you actually kind of worldcraft together so that when you get into the adventures, there's legs to run on, right? Like if you just pick up a random module from D&D and you insert it into a campaign you've been playing for a year, that stuff's not really pertinent or relevant to those characters. It's hard for them to find a reason to go and do it other than heroes go do stuff, right?
So the guy who we had on as our last guest, Mike, is a really good friend of mine, and he and I played through it was kind of a campaign. We played, once every couple of months or whatever, whenever it was just he and I and his brother over at our house. And the two of us played half-brothers. And so we decided that we really wanted our characters to have a pretty tight-knit, like, backstory as to how we got to, like, whatever level we started. I think it was level 10 or something. So he and I got together separately, almost like a session 0, and we literally just grabbed a deck of magic cards. And we just went through there and said, oh, hey, this one looks like a cool place that we could have adventured. And so we'd set it down. This looks like an artifact that maybe we went after at some point, or this looks like a monster that we may have fought. And we picked, I don't know, 12, 15 cards or whatever. And then we went through and we just basically built a story as to the kind of shit we had gotten up to before the campaign began. And that gave a fantastic layer of richness because we already understood who these characters were and the way they were with each other, the things that they had already done. This is the exact same kind of situation. You're going to have your players with the DM sitting down and coming up with a brief but effective backstory for the world that involves directly their characters.
I like the way you put that, brief but effective. It's like efficient world building, right? It's like the stuff that's relevant to the story and to your characters. And, but it's so, like it's also rich and effective. Yeah. That's cool. And that sounds like it's like so much fun the way you did that. And it sounds like it worked out to be just to make a really cool background launching pad again for you to play from. Yeah.
Cool.
Oh,
So we're rounding almost 2.5 hours. We're getting there. So nope, it'll be 2 hours.
hour and a half? Yeah, hour and a half, 2 hours.
Almost
So-
2 hours.
At this point, should we kind of wrap things and figure out what sort of undeniable, immutable signature that Kiel wants to put onto Sunderhearth?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh yeah, awesome.
So yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on pretty much everything that I could think of, and it feels like a fairly well-established, for what we could do in 2 hours, a fairly well-established history for Sunderhearth. Yeah.
And again, it's amazing how like the comments tonight tie back to stuff that we had mentioned off the cuff in previous episodes and start knitting these ideas that other guests have had together with, Kiel's ideas and your ideas and my ideas tonight. It's wonderful how that works out every single time that we start getting, like, each session informs previous sessions, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely, yeah. I love that process, that creative process of connecting the dots and things is just so satisfying to me. Like I view it as like a form of design, right? Like, you've got interior design, graphic design, like that design process and design thinking is like problem solving and putting, seeing how things fit together basically. And it's just a really satisfying creative process. And yeah, the way you guys are doing this, where it's such like a deep dive every session. And like, I think it's by design. Well, maybe not necessarily by design. It's not your intent for things to go off the rails, but like, I think that's unavoidable because, go off the rails in terms of the scope of what you're trying to focus on. You know what I mean? I'm trying to say that's a beautiful thing and a very worthwhile and necessary thing. Because it's, all these natural tie-ins to other things. And like when you get that thread of inspiration, you got to pull it and see how far it goes. Yeah. But for my signature, I'm thinking it's going to be like thinking with the followers of the God of Secrets, and what's going on now, that this is the age of secrets. Not everyone knows that, but that is the case. Is like this propaganda machine, like the web that is being pulled by the God of Secrets. I think that's going to be my signature, in terms of history is written by the victors, and the undeniable victor here, we know, Meta, in world people don't really know at all. The undeniable victor is the God of Secrets, right? And so they have inscrutably been writing history since year zero. And yeah. Is that sort of tangible enough? Is that a bit too, I can just keep riffing?
So are you saying that that they are still either through themselves or through their agents taking a direct hand in continuing to manipulate events?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So
that answers Dice Ogre's question, or someone's question from earlier, of are there any gods who are active? Yeah.
I think the only one that is the God of Secrets. So that doesn't necessarily mean they're active in the same way that gods were always active before the Sundering. It could be that, that they exert their influence in a different way, or it's just, you know how you're in a car, right? You accelerate up to 100 miles an hour, and then you just take your foot off the accelerator. You still just keep coasting for ages and ages and ages. I don't mean the wheel, just the accelerator. Like, you don't immediately stop, like that momentum is the word I'm trying to think of. Sure. Momentum, like the momentum that the God of Secrets had built up leading up to, because this has all been orchestrated by them, right? Leading up to the Sundering itself, and then what's happening afterwards is like the culmination. So although maybe that was one of the payoffs, they knew they wouldn't be able to interact as directly in the same way in the world after the breaking of the wheel. They made sure that they'd set it up and had as many followers as possible, as fervent as followers as possible, and like had indoctrinated and with this sort of ideology, a certain underground population who still persist, probably, I won't necessarily say stronger than ever. Maybe that's the entropy of that is something that's sort of inbuilt. It's like, when you take your foot off the accelerator and keep gripping the wheel, you do slowly lose momentum, right? So I think there's that. I think who's really in charge, and the propaganda and like the ideology of what's going on, is what's going on there. Sorry, I just distracted myself with the thought of like propaganda is generally like specific things that they get you to believe. And it's just tying me back to like the question of why did this happen? Who did it, in terms of the God of Magic being killed,
Right.
So
I just love that the God of Lies was like, it's them damn humans. You can't trust them.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe that's it. It's the propaganda that like, that humans failed the gods, or humans weren't pious enough, or humans were misusing magic, maybe is that's what
humans
it is. It's the propaganda
that
because that's already ties in, right? The humans misused magic, so that's why magic has been taken from us. But actually we can still take it for ourselves by going into Sunderhearth and getting these arcane kernels, and it's like adds this or reinforces that already forbidden and taboo surrounding magic.
Right.
Yeah.
So I love the idea. Oh, go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just going to say, and it makes really good sense that the God of Secrets isn't afraid to come to the mortal realm, because they know how the gun works. Like, they know how the god died. So they don't have a reason to fear the other end of it. They were essentially holding the smoking gun. So they don't have to worry about the big bag murderer, because they know who it was.
So I love that. I love the idea. So the deific magic not working outside of Sunderhearth is because the gods pulled back. There's nothing that prevents them from granting magic to their followers outside of Sunderhearth. It's just that the PR from the God of Secrets was so good that they're so afraid of any sort of connection between them and their followers, because that becomes the impetus for having their heads blown off.
Exactly. Yeah.
Meanwhile, the god of secrets knows that that's not how it works, right? Like 5G won't kill you. He understands this. But he also isn't giving magic to his followers, her followers, because he's just a jerk. Like, he's like, I could give them magic. I'm more than capable of it. Nah.
Absolutely, yeah. Because they've cultivated and orchestrated this thing where they get this huge amount of influence and power without even needing to bestow magic on their followers, right? Like actual magic, their magic, their power is, yeah, exactly.
Plus he he just shows up and is like, hey, so welcome to the monthly meeting of the Cult of Secrets, and here's this magic item that I promise was definitely brought from Sunderhearth because magic doesn't exist anywhere else. Meanwhile, he's just like, here you go. Right, so he can still help his followers out, but it still does him a lot of good to have his people going into Sunderhearth, because the more that door is open, the more chaos seeps out, the more he has to point at the world outside of Sunderhearth and go, look, gods, you need to stay as far removed from this as possible because it's starting to leak out. Like, even the containment we set up isn't very good. Guess we'll just have to not do anything. Sucks there's no one in charge of this season. God, Secret's an asshole.
This is awesome. I love every single time we sit down and do one of these episodes. I'm like, cool. I have no idea what I'm gonna do. I have no idea what we're gonna say. I don't know what we're gonna talk about. It's a little unnerving, but I always know that it's gonna be fine. And at the end of every single one of these episodes, I'm like, all right, like, time to sit down in front of the computer and plan out an entire campaign. So it's amazing to watch that happen in such a short period of time. So yeah, thanks guys.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. No, thank you. Thank you again both for having me. It's been a real blast. It's one of my favorite things to do, collaborative world building and collaborative storytelling. So and it's the perfect way to finish off KielCon 2020, my celebration weekend. So thank you guys.
We all know it's scripted. That's the comment. Yeah. That's the comment in chat right this second.
We're all just scrolling down the same Google Doc, just like it's got like even the name
Insert
tags,
laugh.
like a proper yeah.
The best part was Jeremy, without cracking up, reading his written line of, what is it? So it's been 100 years since the Hundering. So,
yeah. That took us ages to script that part. That was like some proper,
that was
real conversational dialogue. It's hard to nail that stuff down on the page, right?
I researched it a lot.
Genius writing. Awesome. Well, Kiel, thank you so much. And then, as always, as this document evolves, you'll have access to it to come back in and add to anything that you want in your signatures, or update anything you see in any of the text blocks about anything we discussed or anything that's been discussed in previous episodes. And then you'll be one of the first players when many campaigns get made shortly afterwards. We're going to try and invite everyone who's contributed to play in the first couple games of Sunderhearth once it's actually a thing, which is coming up way sooner than I was expecting. I mean, I knew it was going to be 12 months, but I swear to you, it hasn't been 12 months.
It's been an age. We were talking about how earlier in the chat, how ages are more than 100 years. Right. 2020 has been a fucking age already, and it's only the 9th month.
But this speaks so highly of gaming as a hobby that we can sit in a world like we live in, discussing events that have parallels to the real world. And these sessions, this process feels like it has flown by. Like, these 9 sessions feel like they have been so quick to be with each other, especially when you extrapolate it out of the real world. So if you've ever had a doubt that hobbies like this, talking to your friends, being creative, can pull you out of the funk that is reality, this is living proof that this is a good tool. This is a good hobby. This is a good way to maintain your grip on reality, is talking about fantasy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, fantasy gives us the tools to deal with real world problems, either directly or as analogies. And it gives us the tools to fix them, to change them directly. If there is an asshole in a cave who's taking advantage of a town or is kidnapping children, you go to where he is and you tell him to stop. And if he doesn't stop, then you fight him to death. That's, you can affect real change. You can change the world. And at the end of it, in most games, you can kind of take a step back and say, I did something. I feel like I did something for the better. And I think there's a very strong catharsis in that psychologically.
Well and truly, yeah. It's such a great coping mechanism, like regulator of mental health, way to connect with other people and have community while we're so isolated for, most of this year so far. Like, I was talking with my mum last night, and I had the thought that struck me was like, frontline healthcare workers, teachers, first responders, all, and many, many more that I've not named, like they're doing their part and an amazing part to, amazing contribution for what's going on with this pandemic. And that's not my field. That's not what I can do. What I've found that this is a thought that only struck me yesterday, is what I realized what I've been trying to do is to help people feel not so isolated and connected. And, for myself and for my friends, and now with my YouTube channel and my Patreon, like trying to bring as many people along for building worlds together, exploring those fictional worlds, telling stories, like making real connections when it's so hard to do that in person these days. And yeah, it's just, I can't say enough good stuff about this hobby, and you both know that'd be the same for you guys, I know. So yeah,
Gaming
I'm stoked.
as a whole,
Every chance I get to do something like this, I'm just really stoked. So I'm honored to have done this. Thank you.
Gaming as a whole, creativity as a whole, right? It is that it's interesting because we just sat here and talked for 2 hours about a world that has problems, that's full of secrets and lies and death and change. But the difference is when you make your character and you sit down, like Jeremy said, you're going to be able to affect a change. You can end that, you can change it, you can make it better. And so that does give us that moment where you can rapidly affect what's going on. And it's one of the times that you sit down and you're unified, right? Because playing a board game, you end up on opposite sides. There's always a challenge. One side wins or one side doesn't. There's no winner. The winner are the people sitting at the table, spending time with their friends, and for a moment escaping reality, being unified and having a common cause. Now, that being said, in states, it is voting time. So whatever you vote, however you vote, if you want to make a difference, go vote. Right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this is awesome.
That's
like I echo everything that has been said already. Gaming is a very, very special thing to me for a lot of different reasons, of which that I go into a lot on this channel. And I appreciate everybody who's willing to stick with the strange analogies and see them through to the end. Because it's... Our hobby is a very difficult thing to describe to people. It's something that you have to experience in order to really kind of fully understand. And we live in such an era that we can reach out across the globe to somebody who is waking up super early in the morning on a continent literally on the other side of the world to have a discussion like this about gaming. It never ceases to amaze me. And I know how privileged and lucky that I feel to be a part of it. So thank you so much, Kiel, for coming on and discussing this with us. It's been fantastic. In the insight and the coloring by number that you've helped us do, to use Steve's analogy, has been bar none, man. So I appreciate it sincerely.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll just say one more time for those at the back. Thank you again. This has really been an honor and a genuine pleasure to go through this with you, fine folks, and everyone in the chat who are also fine folks. So much amazing input from there. I love doing that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Like I said, you should be able to find the link to Kiel's channel on YouTube down in the description of this video below. Please do check him out. Ooh, wow. Check him out. You're welcome, Kiel.
Check me out, man.
R.I.P. inbox. Check out his channel. And he's already off to a fantastic start, putting out a lot of really fantastic content. And I'm excited to see what he does next, because he is an innate world builder, as you saw tonight on this episode. Steve, is there anything else that you want to say as we are walking out the door?
There's a Banners episode coming up soon, like real soon.
Tomorrow, as a matter
like
of
tomorrow
fact.
soon.
Yeah, super soon. So yeah,
so we got that going on.
If you're into watching D&D games, live play games, then there will be one here tomorrow night. It is episode 20, and of our of our Arthurian themed D&D 5e game, which is always a lot of fun. Which reminds me, I have a little bit of prep work to finish. So
the only thing I'll throw out is if you did it, as always, if you contributed it into the chat, Jeremy and I, Karen, will pull your comments out. We thank you so much for them. When they get used, obviously, they will be attributed to you. So if you see one of us messaging you in the near future saying, hey, do you want it put under Dice Ogre or another name, just let us know.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, again, thank you everyone who has tuned in this evening. We really do appreciate everybody stopping by and watching with us, whether it was live with us tonight and you guys were giving us these fantastic ideas to build off of, or whether you're watching in the future. Leave a comment on the video with your ideas. Please feel free to do that. We will try to work it in if we're not done with it at that point. Yeah, if you like what you saw, hit the like button, subscribe, yada yada, all that stuff. Because there's going to be at least 10, 11, 12, 3 more of these, and I'm excited to get to those as well. So, until next time, may your dice roll high, and your snacks always be within reach. It's not doing it. Hold, please. Technical difficulties. Bye.